The sound of the slap echoed through the little roadside diner so loudly that every fork stopped moving, every cup froze halfway to someone's lips, and every pair of eyes turned toward the young woman sitting alone by the window. For a single heartbreaking moment, the entire room became silent. Nobody rushed to help. Nobody stood up. The girl slowly reached for her wheelchair after being knocked sideways, her trembling hands trying to gather the scattered crayons and sketchbook that had fallen onto the floor. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that the world often watched suffering in silence. What she didn't know was that exactly 1 hour later, the roar of dozens of motorcycle engines would shake the parking lot, and the people who had looked away would witness a moment that none of them would ever forget. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than cruelty, and that everyone deserves dignity and a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Every small act of support helps spread stories that remind us humanity is still alive. Emily Harper had always measured life differently from everyone else. She didn't count the distance she could walk because she couldn't. She counted the number of sunrises she was lucky enough to witness, the smiles of strangers who chose kindness over pity, and the quiet victories that most people never noticed. At 22 years old, she had spent nearly half her life in a wheelchair after a devastating car accident had changed everything. The accident had taken away her ability to walk, but it had never taken away her imagination. She carried a worn leather sketchbook everywhere she went, filling its pages with portraits of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Children laughing in parks, elderly couples holding hands, firefighters resting after exhausting shifts, waitresses comforting tired customers, and lonely travelers staring out rainy windows all became subjects of her gentle pencil strokes. Drawing reminded Emily that beauty still existed even in broken places. The little diner on Highway 47 had become her favorite refuge during the past few months. It wasn't famous. It wasn't fancy. The faded sign outside buzzed every evening, and the booths had scratches carved into the wood from decades of travelers passing through. Yet to Emily it felt safe. The owner always remembered her favorite soup. The elderly waitress always asked about her newest drawings. Truck drivers occasionally bought her coffee without saying a word, leaving before she had the chance to thank them. Those tiny acts of kindness stitched together pieces of hope she often struggled to hold on to. On that rainy Thursday afternoon, however, the familiar warmth of the diner felt strangely different. The clouds hung low over the highway, the parking lot shimmered with fresh rain, and the restaurant was unusually crowded because travelers were waiting for the storm to ease. Emily found her usual seat near the window and opened her sketchbook, quietly drawing an elderly man reading a newspaper while his wife smiled across the table. She became so absorbed in her work that she almost didn't notice the group of young men entering the diner. They arrived carrying the loud confidence that often comes from believing there will never be consequences. Their laughter filled every corner of the room before they even sat down. Muddy boots scraped across the floor, baseball caps were tossed onto tables, and they mocked nearly everyone they passed without caring who heard them. Most customers simply lowered their eyes, hoping the group would lose interest. Unfortunately, Emily's wheelchair caught their attention. At first it was only whispers followed by cruel laughter. Then came mocking gestures, exaggerated limps, and sarcastic applause each time she reached for something on the table. Emily had experienced cruelty before. She had learned to stay silent because responding usually encouraged people who fed on humiliation. She focused harder on her drawing, pretending the voices didn't exist. The bullies interpreted her silence as weakness. One of them rolled a crumpled napkin toward her wheelchair. Another leaned close enough to smirk at the unfinished portrait in her sketchbook before making exaggerated faces meant to entertain his friends. The laughter grew louder with every passing minute. Customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, yet nobody intervened. Some looked away. Others stared into their coffee cups as though avoiding eye contact could erase responsibility. Emily felt the familiar weight settling inside her chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was disappointment. She had spent years believing that most people were good, but moments like these always tested that belief. More painful than the insults was the silence surrounding them. She wondered how many people convinced themselves that someone else would step in while choosing to remain comfortably seated. Then everything happened in seconds. One of the young men snatched her sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with months of careful work. Another laughed as he held it out of reach. Emily instinctively reached forward, pleading only with her eyes. The sketchbook wasn't just paper. It contained memories, dreams, and the fragile pieces of herself she had rebuilt after losing so much. As she reached for it, another bully shoved her shoulder. The wheelchair lurched sideways. Her sketchbook flew across the floor. Crayons scattered beneath dozens of tables. Then came the slap. It was sharp enough to silence the entire diner. Emily's cheek burned instantly. She closed her eyes for only a second, refusing to let the tears escape. When she opened them again, she wasn't looking at the men who had hurt her. She was looking at everyone else. Every stranger who had witnessed what happened. Every person who now faced a choice between comfort and courage. Most looked away. One elderly waitress hurried toward Emily, kneeling despite her aching knees to gather scattered drawings from the floor. Her hands trembled as she carefully brushed dust from each page before placing them back into the damaged sketchbook. Tears filled the waitress's eyes because she knew some pages had been torn forever. The diner owner quietly asked the group to leave, but his voice carried more fear than authority. The bullies laughed one last time before walking into the rain, convinced they had won. Emily thanked the waitress with a weak smile she didn't truly feel. After paying for untouched soup, she rolled herself outside beneath the gray sky. Rain mixed with the tears she had fought so hard to hide. She sat beneath the diner's awning, unable to begin the journey home. For the first time in years, she questioned whether kindness really outweighed cruelty. Across the highway, unnoticed by nearly everyone, an aging truck driver had witnessed the entire incident from his parked rig. He had remained inside because recovering from recent surgery had left him barely able to walk. But he possessed something else, an old flip phone filled with numbers belonging to people who never ignored injustice. With quiet determination, he pressed one familiar contact and spoke only a few calm words before ending the call. Then he waited. Exactly 1 hour later, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines began rolling across the valley.